Welcome to the Irish Pagan School podcast. Your hosts are authors and co-founders of the Irish Pagan School here in County Waterford, Ireland, Lora O'Brien and John O'Sullivan. Fáilte. Hello, this is Lora O'Brien from the Irish Pagan School, and I'm here with Dr. Gillian Kenny. And we are going to do a series of short videos which go through a lot of Gillian's areas of expertise because, I mean, Gillian, you've become a cornerstone of scholarship at the Irish Pagan School. And we have a very rich catalogue of classes that you have taught for us. And we're very grateful for your expertise. And they really, like over the whole series of classes, they really explore like a lot of the nuance of Irish history, which I think, it's hard to find elsewhere. But to just kind of kick us off here, what sparked your initial interest? So your general topic is the lives of women in medieval and early modern Ireland, right? So like what led you there? Like where did that come from?
Really absence. Their absence. When I was being taught history and learning how to read it as an undergraduate. So I remember one particular period, and we had to choose topics. I did a history degree, and I mean, my topics were like, the Industrial Revolution or World War One, and it was all incredibly male focused and centered. I think there was one half of a lecture on the effects of the war at home, for example, which had some references to women. And between that and doing endless classes on the conquest of Ireland and the kind of the beginnings of the kind of English and later British Empire in Ireland. And I just went, well, where are the women? Why is there no stories? Where are the women who you'd often get someone married the daughter of. That was it. So I kind of went looking. So when I was doing my master's, I went to Margaret McCurtain, who's now unfortunately left us and was brilliant, kind of pioneering women's history scholar. And I said to her, what can I start with? And she pointed me towards kind of women of the 12th and 13th centuries and said very little's been done on them. So off I went and was amazed at the richness of what I found there. And then that was my master's and my PhD. I carried it on to the early 16th century. But I think what fascinates me, particularly talking about women in Ireland, is the cultural exchange they facilitated. We talk about the effect women's bodies have had on history in kind of one sense, in how, as mothers, as wives, as caregivers, as teachers, they have altered culture and cultural exchange. So in Ireland, for example, as new waves of kind of colonizing forces came in and gradually settled and took land and they married in, you then start to see a pattern emerging of children brought up with English names, but Irish culture, Irish language. And these children grew up to then become this kind of sometimes they kind of what we know as the Anglo-Irish, who would kind of a bit of everything and were unique to Ireland, but also sometimes they would go kind of fully back to the mother's Gaelic culture. And that happened really quite often. So to me, it's testament to the strength of influence mothers had, but also their families, to how cultures interweaved and mingled within Ireland in the medieval and early modern period, into how complex Irish history is. Many people understand Irish history to be a binary. It's English versus Irish. And when you scratch away at it, it very much isn't that. There are different identities and different ways of being Irish, which was often facilitated through the bodies of women and the lives of women. And so as I began to get more involved in that, it just took on a life of its own. So then I wrote my book, and then I kind of have gone on now. I'm doing something on Gráinne O'Malley. But again, it's the same idea because Gráinne O'Malley, of course, from a Gaelic family, but married into what was a hibernicized Anglo-Irish, and her life to me is sort of the last. It can be characterized as kind of the last gasp of Gaelic Ireland,
Yeah.
of how they lived before the trauma and the horror of the mid to late 16th century and into the 17th. So she's kind of an icon in that way of, I mean, she's very extreme. She's a, no Gaelic woman did what she did. She kind
Mm.
of took it to the nth degree, but how she lived and how her culture came up against that aggressive kind of exterminating focus of the Tudors kind of put an end to what I'm interested in, that kind of cross-fertilization of ideas and how people accommodated each other, how people learned to live alongside each other, holding different ways of being and different cultural influences. But it wasn't perfect. It was often not great, but cultural spheres emerged and rubbed along beside each other, and women were in many ways key to that happening,
Mm.
and making Ireland the fairly unique place it was in the late medieval and just into the early modern period. So that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I know that like when I was doing just normal, Irish secondary school curriculum of history and everything, the whole 1600s period is kind of glossed over. Um, but I suppose that would be in some ways the start of where we start to get into that binary a little bit more, isn't it? And that's what I think you're saying,
Yeah.
where so anything kind of before that, we've got a lot more of this nuance, we've got a lot more of this complexity, and these hidden, or I often see hidden voices, being used for like minorities who don't have a historical place
Mm.
generally. But I think it's more like discounted voices or discounted histories, because they weren't hiding themselves, they were being hidden, so or being forgotten
Yeah.
deliberately, or just there was no interest in it. So I'm delighted that you've been doing this. And would you see, so you've obviously been doing this for a few years now.
Yeah.
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 Would you see it as any different now? I mean, I'm just coming out of a master's, and there was, at the very least, there is lip service being given now to hidden histories. We're seeing with I know Mary McAuliffe's work, like of the LGBT women during the revolution, like, even 5, 10 years ago, that just wasn't happening at all, So do you think we've
Yeah.
progressed, or like, is there still a lot more work to do?
Um, yeah, I think we have progressed. I think we've progressed at many different levels. So you were talking about in school the 1600s were kind of glossed over, and I do think so. I do think Ireland, when it comes to its political and maybe its sociocultural history, had a very what can be called a post-colonial mindset for a very
Mm,
long time.
mm,
Nobody really wanted to call it out for what it was with the former imperial masters. Well, we get on now, so why disturb it? And the last, say, 10 years, especially, Irish historians have been writing about the 16th and 17th century and calling it genocide, which is what it was.
mhm.
And that has ruffled feathers, and it has kind of caused some disquiet in some parts of the British Academy,
Yeah.
because no culture likes to be called out on that, especially in somewhere so close to home. And especially, I think, with the Irish perspective. And of course, there is a kind of a racial element to it, because as we know, the British Empire went elsewhere in the world and wreaked havoc. But I think there's a particular reluctance to acknowledge damage done to people who look like you,
Mm,
and who are fair skinned and have a similar culture. So I think that's been interesting and that's been difficult. And I think there's still sometimes a little bit of reluctance to call that sometimes amongst older scholars, but I think it is changing very much because, of course, it is set in the context of what it meant at the time. But I think there's a growing acknowledgement that treatment of the Irish population was markedly different to how populations were being treated in Bedfordshire or
yeah.
Yorkshire
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
they revolted. So I think that's been a really good and positive change, because I think it enables people to more fully view history and what it means and the effect it's had not only on subsequent Irish populations but also populations in the north of Ireland as it is now and England. But I think in terms of things like hidden histories, like queer histories and things, I think there's been a huge amount of progress. I think there's a real push, especially amongst younger scholars, to unearth those histories and to talk about, for example, in the modern period, how in a very cloistered, very suffocating kind of theocratic Irish state, people who were different managed to find themselves, and when they didn't, they often left.
Mm.
And there was a shock and a trauma associated with that, not only for them, but for the culture they left behind. So I think it's about finding those gaps in the accepted narratives and finding the people who lived in them and what kind of lives they had, and it more fully kind of explores and compounds what Irishness is. I think for modern, Irish kids growing up who may have complex identities, who may inhabit spaces that weren't often always acknowledged before. I think there must be a real maybe a comfort or maybe an acknowledgement that this happened before, and within our culture
Mm.
this is the way it was treated, and sometimes it was treated better than at other times. I
Yeah.
mean, I look back to kind of sometimes there are medieval Irish kind of wonder tales, and when you analyze them, when you look at them, I mean, within kind of the clerical and lay culture, there's a strong thread of difference within them. There's a famous one about an abbot who kind of changed gender
Mm.
and then changed back again and lived a life as a woman and then changed back into a man. And it was, there is no, it's an interesting story. And of course, everything comes down to us after several versions, but it is a tale of wonder and delight. It is not a tale of kind of dislike or condemnation
Yeah.
in many
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
So it's kind of seen as magical. And I mean, so much is lost to us that you wonder where people who didn't inhabit the binary when it comes to, a spectrum of gender, identity, where they sat in
Mm.
previous. I mean, I wonder. Much of it is speculative, but I think younger scholars, for example, re-examining older texts, looking at how characters are portrayed. Say, you think of someone like Cuchulainn, then it's a really interesting work going on, which not everyone agrees with, but there's some really excellent kind of queer
Mm.
retellings of Cuchulainn, which just makes you sit and think and go, actually, yeah, that does make sense. Why
Mm.
is he presented like this?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
us, our visions of what masculinity is nowadays can sometimes not mesh with what it was in the past.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm really hopeful for it. I think it's brilliant. And there's loads of really good stuff being done on other excluded parts of history, other excluded identities within history. People like the indigent poor, people like the very ill, people like Jewish people, Muslim people, depictions of them. They were in Ireland as well.
Mm.
We just don't see them because
Yeah.
the monolithic idea of Irishness, which came from the modern period, kind of obliterated them.
Mm.
So yeah,
Mm.
I'm really hopeful that it is getting better,
Yeah.
and that that it will be, I don't know, kind of hopeful to people who don't subscribe to
Yeah.
to the idea of what it means. The maidens dancing at the crossroads, and
Yeah.
that's not me.
Yeah.
Is it? Well, where am
Yeah.
I? You're there. You're actually
Yeah.
there, really
You are there.
prominently
Yeah.
in many
Yeah.
of the great tales. You're
Yeah.
there.
You're
So
there. Your
I think it's just about
ancestors are there.
rediscovering it. Yeah. I think it's about rediscovering it. I think it's about holding a mirror up. History's always written by the winners. That's the great canard. And within Irish, our sources are limited. We've lost many of them, but there's translations going on all the time. There's work being done on Gaelic manuscripts all the time, and stuff is being uncovered
Mm.
across the spectrum.
Mm.
It's detective work and it's often archaeological kind of
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
on documents. But I think we are producing work that shows that Ireland was a rainbow
Mm.
in the past, just as much as it is today.
Awesome.
It was expressed differently, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't always on show, but I think people in the past found ways of expressing themselves.
Yeah.
I think they're very different attitudes in many ways. Yeah, I talk sometimes, surprising for people. You talk sometimes, say, for example, about you know Irish strictures on kind of sexual acts, in the penitentials, which are kind of handbooks for priests which hand out punishments. And there's like there's a lot of talk of kind of like masturbation and sex acts, and it's not really that bad. I mean, because we're used to that kind of 19th century onwards Puritan view of the
Yeah.
Irish, and it's like
Yeah.
actually you look back far enough, and there was a lot going on, and really people were there was much more of a, well, it's going to happen, it's part of that, and it's not by any means a golden age, and
Yeah.
there is still some
Absolutely.
obviously
Yeah.
punishment attached to it, but I think people would be amazed the further back they go
At what's
and they
actually
get to
there.
see
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what actually is there. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah.
I think it's hopeful.
Yeah. And we are going to continue this series. So there should be a playlist coming up at the end of this video if you want to listen to all of them. But meanwhile, there are many, many classes that Gillian has at the Irish Pagan School. There will be a link below the video to all of her classes, including the Ireland Secret History, the LGBT class that we have done. So I think we'll deep dive into that a little bit later on in the playlist. But for now, this has been a really good introduction, Gillian. So thank you so much. Definitely check out the class links below for further details. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a positive review in your podcast listener. Then head over to irishpaganschool.com and enroll in one of our free or paid courses. Slán go fóill, and we will see you next time.